There's some very interesting surveys out there on trust. Gallup did a survey. There's a drop across the board in trust in all institutions except law enforcement, which is very interesting. Congress, sorry for my friends there, is the lowest. Media is down there almost as low as Congress. Those that rank the highest were small business and the military. So this low media rank, is that fair, or is that being manufactured as part of a culture war?
Oh, it's fair. I mean, it's entirely fair. I mean, I think that one of the things that we've seen for both good and bad, the fragmentation of media is a result of systemic distrust in the media, and that's existed for a very long time. I mean, that's nothing new. And I think that it's completely fair for people to look at the media. I know there are people on the left who think that the media is too right-wing, right? Obviously, we on the right think that the media is far too left-wing. But I think that sort of distrust in media sources is very often justified. I think that we're requiring more of people than we used to in the past, because once people have realized that there's an inherently political angle to how people cover the news, now we're asking them, if you want a full rounded diet, you actually have to choose it yourself, right? You have to cultivate yourself to watch the Young Turks and then watch my show and decide who you agree with, and where there's sort of a common locus of fact, that's the fact and everything else is the opinion. That's asking a lot of viewers where we didn't used to ask very much of viewers at all, right? You just turn on the evening news and buy whatever Walter Cronkite is saying, whether it's true or not. I think most Americans waking up to that is a good thing. The systemic lack of trust in media has some bad downstream effects sometimes, because when there are no gatekeepers, there are no gatekeepers. So I like the fact that there are no gatekeepers, because I think the gatekeepers were very often biased, but without gatekeepers, sometimes bad stuff gets through.
Yeah, I mean, I think that right now we're experiencing people existing in various filter bubbles. So if you are, for instance, consuming most of your news online, if you like a particular brand of programming, if you, let's say, lean more conservative and you're watching mostly conservative news, algorithms offer up more and more conservative news. And so when you get if you have preconceived notions and all of a sudden you're hearing or reading something that challenges those preconceived notions, you're gonna have a negative reaction to it. And you see that playing out across the board. I'll give you an example. I mean, I have family members who are constantly consuming news online. My mom's a good example, right? You'd be surprised she's my mom, because she's on Facebook, she clicked on a link to, let's say, the Daily Wire, perfect example. Well, Facebook is gonna be offering up more Daily Wire type content, and then all of a sudden when she's watching the Young Turks, she'll be like, well, you know, I read on Facebook, or I read on the Daily Wire, whatever, that X, Y, and Z happened, and you're wrong, right? That conversation doesn't actually happen that often, but I'm giving you an example.
I was hopeful there for a second.
Right, and so look, there are all sorts of issues with the media, right? I mean, the media for the longest time completely ignored the very real frustrations that workers have been feeling in this country. I mean, the Federal Reserve released data indicating that nearly half of Americans can't even afford a $400 emergency. At the same time, you tune into CNN, CNBC, MSNBC, I mean, it doesn't matter, across the board, and they're like, the economy is doing great. You know, we're seeing record growth, and what they're specifically talking about is the stock market. But the stock market is disconnected from the reality that the majority of workers are experiencing. So I think that type of stuff leads to people feeling, you know, distrustful toward the press. At the same time, they exist in these filter bubbles and have their preconceived notions. It's hard to challenge that. So there's a lot of different things happening at the same time. I don't blame people for not being so trusting of the media. One other thing that I'll note is that the incentives are always in the wrong place. The kind of stories that I want to talk about on the Young Turks, and do talk about on the Young Turks, get no attention. They don't do well in terms of the number of views. I want to talk about international news. I want to talk about what's happening in Brazil. I want to talk about what's happening in Ecuador. It'll get like maybe 40,000 views at most. You know what gets a lot of views? I don't know, Anna Kasparian destroys this person, or here's the latest cat fight. Like, I hate it. It's garbage. It's garbage. Because it leads to people not trusting the press, but at the same time, the profits are there. The money is there. And I think you see that play out across the board, whether you're talking about cable news or online media.
Yeah, and at the dinner table, we're having an interesting conversation. It's clearly a generational thing. My generation grew up watching Walter Cronkite and Huntley and Brinkley and all these folks. And one of the things that I saw in your bio was that you got interested in this field because of Barbara Walters. So What happens now to the Barbara Walters? I mean, where does news reporting go? Will the nightly news be a thing of the past? And are we simply going to continue to retreat to those mediums that demonstrate that we know everything already? Where's this going to go now?
Well, let me just note, I loved Barbara Walters on ABC's 2020. So I remember as a kid, like getting super excited after TGIF was over because ABC's 2020 would be on. And I was like fascinated by the fact that this woman was getting paid to talk to these incredibly interesting people from around the world. And I was just fascinated by the conversations. That's how I got interested in journalism and the media. But I just feel like the type of conversations that she had, or just news about world events, they don't seem to attract the kind of attention that they used to. And it might be because of an oversaturated market. It might be because conflict tends to sell. Manufactured conflicts tend to sell. But I wish we can get back to a place where journalism still really existed, where there was like ethical standards that were, that reporters abided by, anchors abided by. I wish there was a clear distinction between opinion and actual hard news journalism. This is what I talk about with my journalism students whenever I have the time to teach. I always tell them, I'm like, look, there's a difference between what I do, which is analysis, opinion, and what you should be doing as an investigative journalist, for instance. Going out there and actually gathering the news, talking to both sides, not equating both sides and acting as if you're completely neutral, but making sure that you gather the facts on the ground and report them as they are. It's really hard to find that these days. There's still great journalism taking place. I wouldn't be able to do my analysis or my job without that great journalism taking place. But these are the people who are oftentimes not paid well, ignored, and don't get any of the benefits that someone might in the media if you engage in the conflict nonsense.
Can we go back, Ben, and separate the fact-based from the opinion now, or is it going to be conflated for the foreseeable future?
I think the truth is that was a relatively modern construct. If you go back to the foundations of the Republic, the people who were reporting were also doing opinion, and that was true all the way through the beginning of the 20th century. It was really only with Walter Lippmann in the 1920s that you start talking about objective standards in journalism. And there's a difference between an objective standard that you apply to how a story is reported and being an objective reporter, meaning you have no politics at all. And I think, frankly, if you want to reinstall some sort of institutional trust, it would be good for reporters to say, here's who I voted for, and then here are also the facts that I am reporting on, because otherwise it ends up being a gotcha, right? I see how you're reporting that. I see what you're doing. I know what you really think about this story. So that's a major issue. I think the other big issue, obviously, I mentioned gatekeepers before. I'm very wary of the reinstallation of institutional gatekeepers, because if you want to talk about market incentives, the big players have all the incentives to ensure that they are the ones who maintain their access via the gates. And this is one of my great fears with some sites that we've been very successful with, like Facebook, is that reestablishing the idea that there are quote-unquote trusted news sources, and those all coincidentally are legacy media sources, means that everybody who's not a legacy media source, somebody who started up a company in the last 10 years, right, we opened our doors in 2015, we're not legacy media. And so we don't have that legacy. So now you're shutting out all the players who are actually entering the market.